Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. We thank you for the privilege that we have to present this material, and may you speak through me and guide my lips. In Jesus' name we pray and thank you. Amen. This afternoon, brand new talk, as Matt said. This one is dealing with a global obsession that we have here, obviously in the United States, but around the world, and that it deals with video games. We entitled this one Artificial Atmosphere, kind of loosely defining the word. Artificial is what? It's kind of something that's fake, an imitation of the real thing. Atmosphere, many definitions, but it's kind of an environment or a mood, if you will. So kind of a fake mood environment that is created by this global obsession that has permeated today's society. A little illustration. It will start to make sense when we start talking about the psychological effects of the video game industry upon the human psyche. The parable of the talents. We find this in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. And it says in the opening verse there, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered them unto them his goods." So right off the bat, we can ask the question, well, who is the kingdom of heaven for? Very simply, just a quick overview. In this verse, it's a verse that most people know very well and memorize when they're very young. As I get older, it becomes a very favorite verse of mine. John 3:16, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have" what? Everlasting life. In this small verse, in two sentences or one sentence, the whole gospel message is encapsulated. So those that accept this gospel or this message of Jesus Christ have the rights to the kingdom of heaven. Is that correct, logically? Okay. So we carry on. Matthew 25, the next verse, verse 15, it says, "And unto one he gave 5 talents, and unto another 2, and another 1, and to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey." So this parable is Christ is breaking down this parable, and he's talking about distributing talents or abilities to his servants, people that follow Christ. And those that inherit the kingdom of heaven are going to have, in this life, talents or abilities to help promote the kingdom of heaven. Now, each one of us have different talents. Some of us sing better. I am not one of those. Some of us can play instruments better. But each one of us has an equal amount of talent. We're all given the same. Can anybody guess what that talent is? Time. Exactly. Each one of us is given time. And, time, as we know, as the events of this world are unfolding, we know that time is dwindling for us on this earth. So each one of us are given, an allotment of time, and we are called to use that time to the best of our ability. And for those followers of Christ, those that are going to possess the kingdom, Christ expects us to help further that mission. Is that correct? Okay. Well, artificial atmosphere, video games. It's easy to say that it's probably one of the greatest time wasters on the planet today. In this article here, military.com, this is taken from that article, 72% of the U.S. population played video games last year, up from 64% in 2006. Obviously, this was 2007. And that percentage has probably increased a little bit. And then more than 90% of the American children in that demographic play games every day. So that's a huge chunk of children playing video games. Now we're just going to kind of go through a few statistics here to set some foundations. Can anybody guess what the average age of video gamers are? 18, 12, 10, 13, 29. 29. And now a couple reasons why people think this. One of them is people at that age, they're professionals or they have a good source of income, they have a higher disposable source of income, and they can spend their money on video games. Of course, in the times we live in, that's probably not the case anymore. The other thought, and Scott and I were actually talking about this, is, you know, our generation, I'm 32, and we grew up in the age when Nintendo came on the scene and became big. And so most of that age group grew up with Nintendo in the household or friends that had Nintendo, and so it kind of naturally progressed. Time well spent. Video games consume... see, this one's hard because it's so all over the board. And in researching this, I just found so many weekly averages that were just all over the place, as low as 6 hours. And I even found a small percentage. It was actually about 20% spend about 100 hours a week playing video games. That's a lot of time spent playing video games. Television is around 31 to 40 hours a week. Can anybody guess how much time we spend reading? 2 hours? You're close. 3 hours per week. And unfortunately, as time goes on, that's probably going to get smaller and smaller. Here are a few examples of the video game consoles, kind of like the Nintendo, whatnot. Units sold up to date. The Wii Nintendo has sold 51 million units. Xbox, 30 million. PlayStation, 22 million. So this is a huge, huge gaming industry. A little graph. And this is just, I just picked this apart from various Google searches and seeing kind of how much money was spent each year, annual video game industry revenues. Obviously, in 2009, they projected 57 billion was going to be grossed for this year. Look at the jump, though. For 2008, 21 billion. And then you just see this gradual progression starting from 2002. This topped a few years ago how much the film industry makes. I mean, it completely crushed it. And this will kind of give you an example. This is a game that came out a couple years ago. It's called The World of Warcraft. And each game is roughly around $40. And it came in a couple installments, like in expansion packs. And each pack that was sold roughly around 2 million, 2.4, 2.8 million. So if you can kind of do the math in your mind, if it sold 2 million copies at $40 a pop, that's a lot of money. That's, like it says here, 112 million on its first day. That's just the first day of sales. And this video game, what it does is it allows you to play online against people around the world. And there's part of this whole clan, if you will, or this group, World of Warcraft group. And there's roughly 11 to 12 million people that play in this game. It costs roughly around $15 a month to join to play this month to month. So it's easily a $1 billion a year franchise. Put together here just a quick history on the video games.
This is Willie Higginbotham. He helped invent the nuclear bomb and the first computer game. It showed up as a novelty exhibit at Brookhaven National Lab in 1958. A primitive version of tennis, it was just a dot moving back and forth on an oscilloscope screen. Fast forward, 1961. Student and pioneering hacker Steve Russell, nickname Slug. He spent 6 months tapping into a $120,000 computer at MIT. End result, a punch card-driven video game called Space War. Next player in the game, Nolan Bushnell. Nolan's next move, taking $500 and starting his own company in Santa Clara, California with buddy Ted Dabney. The year was 1972. The company was called Atari. Time to head back over to Japan, and a company called Nintendo. And in 1985, just as everything really hit bottom, Nintendo stood up and said they weren't going to take it anymore, and launched their own gaming console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES.
Nintendo has the most video game hit. Now you're playing with power.
Yamauchi turned to this guy he had hired named Shigeru Miyamoto.
By Japanese standards, Miyamoto was sort of a wild man. Miyamoto came up with something that had never been done in gaming. A story to motivate the action. Okay, let's back up to 1981 for a second. This is the original Castle Wolfenstein. But just 11 years later, technology would take it from this to this. Wolfenstein 3D was the brainchild of id Software, a company run by two young game designers named John Carmack and John Romero. It was also one of the first games to be played through a first-person perspective. The Sony PlayStation hit the shelves in September 1995 and immediately left Sega's new system, the Saturn, in the dust. Sony planned to follow up the PlayStation with the PlayStation 2. The Seattle-based company decided it was time to get into the business. When the software giant released the Xbox in 2001, it had an exclusive on a new first-person shooter, Halo.
So that was just a very quick synopsis. You see, it goes from a very kind of primitive video game system. Atari, they came out with, can anybody tell me what they're known for? What game they came out with? I heard it right here. Pong. That's right, Pong. It was almost just like kind of an accident, and they were working on it, and they stuck it in some little tavern type thing, and the next day they had to come and take all the quarters out. People had never seen anything like this. They had the pinball machine and whatnot, but no one had ever seen where you could interact against somebody and it would get harder and there'd be noises and whatnot. And from there, it just progressed. Games were kind of primitive, and then, like it said, Nintendo came on the scene, and what they did, they added a storyline to it. And of course, that will hook the person when they can achieve point A to point B and follow a storyline. And then, of course, the rest is history. The other big point I wanted to show there was those two guys from Texas created the first-person shooter, where you look down the barrel of a gun and you go around and you're shooting people. And of course, that spawned a whole generation of video games. And what it didn't talk about here also was personal computing video games, which makes a big chunk of the video game industry. In constructing a video game, there's three concepts for proper ingredients that make a successful video game. The first is what we call sound and fury. Sound and fury, it's kind of self-explanatory, but the noises and the music. And then the fury is the lights and glitz. The next is death and destruction. And again, self-explanatory. If you can have a game where there's lots of explosion and there's killing and there's all this, it becomes very exciting, and it will get the consumer to buy more of your product. So, and the death and destruction doesn't necessarily have to limit itself to actual killing and explosions. Football games, sports games that deal with aggression fit into this category. The last concept that makes a great video game is computer control, where you are controlling a person and the computer is almost intuitive to respond to your commands in the computer game. Has anybody heard of Skinner's box? A psychologist of the 20th century, B.F. Skinner was his name. He is known for creating what we see here down on the right side, a box that had a rat or also a pigeon in it. And basically how this box was constructed was it had a lever, and out of boredom, one time the rat pushed the lever and out came a pellet of food. And so over time the rat would continue to push the lever, figuring out that every time he pushed the lever, food would come out. Therefore, what was going on in his mind was it was being reinforced with reward. And they tried other experiments when, with a light, if a green light went on, you'd know to press the lever, the pigeon would peck the button. Or if the red light would go on, nothing would come out. Also, they tried what was called partial reinforcement. Partial reinforcement you press the lever and nothing would come out. You press it again and then it would come out. So it was kind of intermittent. It didn't happen all the time. Also along those lines, what's going on in our minds is we all obviously have what is known as dopamine being released. It's a natural chemical that's kind of associated with pleasure and reward. So like food, or if students actively try to do good on their exams or reports because they know they'll get a good grade, that's releasing the dopamine, and therefore they try to achieve those. Well, video games are kind of on those same principles. And we'll have an example here. Can you give another example of a major million-dollar industry out there that goes on this principle of partial reward? Give you a clue. It takes your money and doesn't give much back. Casinos. You know, you can go in and you can put money in, and they'll maybe give you $100, and you think, wow, I'm on fire. I'm going to keep winning, winning, winning. Well, $2,000 later, you haven't won that money back. That's that same concept. Here's a little, this is actually a commercial they made for a video game that's coming out, and they're kind of poking fun of this, how it works, but it's actually what they do, and this is how they consult about these things.
Guys, we're all on the same team. Come on, we can come up with something. Yeah, Bill.
Joel. Why don't we do like a multi-tier thing where we get like easy missions, we start with them, right, and get decent rewards, and then maybe the missions get progressively harder and harder, and then we get you know, better and better rewards.
Interesting.
Interesting? What team are you on? I like the start. The missions start easy. How about they get progressively easier, and I get all the rewards up front?
But why would the player continue to play the rest of your missions if they've already got all the loot on the first one?
Because I'm awesome.
We chuckle, but this is how they do it. If they made all the games easy, there would not be any money in video games. So if you make a game that's progressively harder and harder, or there's high rewards, then people are going to pay for that product, and they're going to continue to buy it. Along these lines of talking about the psychology behind it, according to this Dr. Scott Rigby, games have the potential to satisfy 3 basic psychological needs: autonomy, freedom of choice, mastery, feeling like you're competent at something or being able to achieve something, and social interaction, just interaction between you and me. And we're starting to see that in many video games. The one we talked about, the World of Warcraft earlier, you get on and you interact with people around the world, you design groups of people and you orchestrate them to do this. It's kind of all fulfilling these needs that video games are promoting. And of course, this adds to the addictiveness of it. Here is a game that came out, and it just gives you an example of how people get so addicted because it's fulfilling these psychological needs.
Behold the galaxy, full of stars and light and intelligence. But it wasn't always like this. Not long ago, it was cold and dark. So what happened? Someone made a decision. Someone looked at a microbe and thought he could use a longer flagella and a pair of pinchers too. Yeah! Next thing you know, he's king of the ocean. Then someone decided he should hit the beach. Land creatures were born, but life on land is a dicey proposition. So someone looked at our hero and said he needs to be able to defend himself. And voila! Ironically, this led to what we call civilization. But civilization meant more competition for just about everything. Happily, someone pulled our species aside and said, "You guys need to chill out and unify this planet." So they did. They built starships, and they set out to conquer the galaxy. But what they never realized was that all along the way, from humble microbes to starship captains, someone had guided them at every turn. And that someone is you.
So if they can convince you that you will be in control and you will do all these things, and they'll kind of throw a little bit of evolution out there and make sure that you kind of believe that on the side as well, then they have your money, they have your loyalty, and they know that you're hooked and you're addicted. Does anybody remember this slide from our first night? We talked a little bit about the brain. And as we develop these talks, and this talk particular, it's very similar to that of the movies. I mean, kind of the same principles go on, just a different form of entertainment or different form of media. But again, for review, how the brain works. There's 4 gears. And the 2 that we want to pay attention to are alpha and beta. Alpha, remember, is the gear in our mind, or the wave pattern that we're kind of daydreamy and not 100% there. We're kind of an autopilot. Beta is when we're actively thinking about things and discussing ideas, and we're actively engaged. So how does video games, and keeping in mind this whole addictive property about them, how does those alpha and beta brainwave patterns affect us? And do they affect us? This was taken from megagames.com. This was a Japanese professor did this study. It says, in a survey conducted by Akio Mori, a professor at Nihon University College of Humanities and scientists, it was found that the longer people spent playing video games, the less activity they showed in the prefrontal region of their brains, which governs emotions and creativity. Mori analyzed that brainwaves of 240 people aged between 6 and 29. Separating the brainwaves, they indicated liveliness and degree of tension in the prefrontal region of the brain, and alpha waves, which often appear when the brain is resting. Further on in the article, those, and he broke the group into 2 groups, those that played not so much and then those that played quite a bit. Those in the half video game category who spent between 1 and 3 hours each day playing video games for 3 to 4 days a week had roughly equal alpha and beta wave activity before they started playing a game. However, once they started playing, the beta waves rapidly decreased and falling below the level of the alpha waves. Beta waves activity in people in the video game group who spent between 2 and 7 hours each day playing video games was constantly near 0, even when they weren't playing, showing that they had hardly used the prefrontal regions of their brain. And the article goes on to say that many people exhibited, they were easily angered, and they had impatience and fatigue and all this. And what I found fascinating, though, but even after these people stopped actively playing the video games, their mind stayed in that alpha state. And remember, when it's an alpha, it's almost like we're in a hypnotic format. And we'll look at that a little bit farther here, how that can be dangerous and detrimental to our well-being and spirituality. Here's a commercial put out by Microsoft Xbox. Now, this commercial, it's humorous, but again, they're sticking it in our faces saying, we know what's going on in your mind, and this is what you look like. It doesn't get any more obvious than that. Well, with that in mind, if that is actively working, if our minds are staying in alpha for long periods of time, and there was exhibiting chronic fatigue and people getting easily angered, you know, there's kind of the debate. Does video games have a direct link to violence? Of course, the video game industry is going to say, no, there's no link, because they know that they'll lose money. And then there's the other side, the senators, the right wing, the researchers are saying, yes, there is a link. Devin Moore was just 18 when he was taken to an Alabama police station for questioning about a stolen car. He was initially cooperative, but then lunged at his captor's gun. He shot the man twice and ran out into the hallway, where he shot a second policeman 3 times. He let off 5 rounds at the 3rd man before making his escape in a police car. All 3 men died from shots to the head. When Moore was finally captured, he is reported to have said, "Life is like a video game. You have to die sometimes." And then the article went on to say that he was an active gamer of this game, Grand Theft Auto. Obviously, there's a series if they have 4 of them. It's a game it's a very violent game. You kind of just go around, you steal cars, you kill people, and it's a pretty brutal, in-your-face game. Here's a PlayStation commercial.
For years, I've lived a double life. In the day, I do my job. I ride the bus, roll up my sleeves with the hoi polloi. But at night, I live a life of exhilaration.
Of missed heartbeats and adrenaline.
And, if the truth be known,
a life of dubious virtue.
I won't deny I've been engaged in violence, even indulged in it.
I've maimed and killed adversaries, and not merely in self-defense.
I've exhibited disregard for life,
limb
and property,
and savoured every moment. You may not think it to look at me,
but I have commanded armies
and conquered worlds.
And though in achieving these things,
I have set morality aside,
I have no regrets.
For though I've led a double life, at least I can say
I've lived.
Set morality aside. Now they're talking about, obviously, living through the video game. Does violence have a link to video games? Now my personal belief, aside from all studies, I believe there is a direct link. Because we, kids especially, that their minds are still forming and still adapting to their environments, usually take on those tendencies or traits that they witness. For example, we know that children that witness a parent that physically abuses the other parent typically exhibit those same traits when they get older. So how is video games any different? Now, I'm not saying that if we play video games, violent ones, we're going to go out tomorrow and shoot a bunch of people. But is it just the same to be angry with somebody? You know, these are things that oftentimes don't get looked at. Why is there so much impatience in the world, or irritability, or why can't we concentrate on things? The book of Titus, chapter 2, verses 11 through 12 say, "For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world." So the Bible is very clear on the way we are to conduct our lives. And if we live that way through video games, as we learned from the presentation on movies in Hollywood, it's as if we are doing it ourselves. When the whole violence topic really exploded in the United States, it went to many, many Senate hearings. They called in many people from the gaming industry, from the motion picture industry, priests and preachers. This is Jack Valentine. He's the president and CEO of Motion Picture Association of America. He stated this about instilling virtue in our children and where it should come from. "There are 3 pillars and only 3 which support the rostrum from which spring a child's conduct: home and church and school. Mothers, fathers, priests, ministers, rabbis, teachers, and principals have to insert in a young child's heart and mind early on an impenetrable moral shield against which all blandishments of peers and all the enticements of the mean streets and clannish cliques and visual and oral images crack and shatter." If we are not, as parents or as guardians or as friends, are not instilling good things, wholesome things in our children and the young people, this video game industry is doing that, and Hollywood is doing that, and they are not shy about doing so. Here is a clip of a judge. This was a case done of this guy who killed his parents because they took away his Xbox because he was playing too much of it, and he killed them at gunpoint.
It's my firm belief, as a human being and not as a jurist, that Daniel does suffer from a serious defect of the mind. It's my firm belief that after a while, the same physiological responses occur that occur in the ingestion of some drugs. My opinion would be that most of the activity that is required for success in these games takes place in the limbic system of the brain, where the issue is to act or not react and to do it accurately. And I believe that the reward or stimulus that this provides is sufficient to cause the release of large amounts of dopamine, the same as would be released if someone were to ingest cocaine or any drug with amphetamine properties. Otherwise, you couldn't play 10, 12, 15, 18 hours at a time.
If we can get children hooked on a particular game, whether it's violence or whether it's these other kind of games, potentially they will start to take on those traits. Although there has been more than 50 years worth of research, most people seem to have the idea that while these studies suggest there might be a small link, the jury is still out. Wrong, says John Murray, a developmental psychologist from Kansas State University, one of the editors of the book Children and Television, 50 Years of Research, and author of U.S. government-sponsored reports in 1972 and 1982. Murray is exasperated by this kind of ambivalence. He says it is impossible to conclude anything other than that violence on TV has raised the level of violence and aggression in our society. And while research on computer games has begun only recently, what there is suggests violent games have a stronger effect. Video games are more worrisome than TV because they are interactive, says Murray. Children learn best by demonstration and then imitation, with reward for getting things right. That's exactly what video games do. You see, these psychologists in the video game industry know exactly how this works. Is everyone familiar with the Nintendo Wii, how it operates? Is there anybody that's not? Just in quick, remember the Nintendo Wii is a wireless controller. You do active full movement. You're not limited to just little controllers here. Here's a video game. It's probably one of the most violent video games out there. I've blurred it out. But look how involved it is with this gamer. This was taken from CBS. And then there's a psychologist that talks about it afterwards.
So your emotions are recreated in the game.
This is correct. And this is why you need to avoid confrontation, is because your adversaries are so much more powerful. However, you can slaughter them in an increasingly brutal manner.
I think that this is the sort of game that's most likely to have an effect, and I think if we're going to see an effect, then games that desensitize people to violence, games that actually have the players act out the things in a physical way, are more likely to have one.
What does using the controller in that violent way do to a person's psyche?
Well, you know, I think the US military used video games to desensitize to a certain extent, so I think that actually it would have the potential to reduce the effect that you're actually hitting somebody. If you're acting out that movement, it may well become something that becomes more instinctual. And a lot of the research on aggression is essentially, it is very impulsive in many ways, so that if you have some muscle memory or if you have some reduced ability to filter out aggressive impulses, then you know, the potential for actually causing or making aggression worse is real.
In this game, I mean, you're actively engaged in killing people. You pick up anything from glass shards, anything you find, and you are imitating and commanding this person on the screen to kill. So again, what is a psychologist saying? Is there memory in our muscles? There is. And can that get stored there? Yes, it can. And it's interesting, he made the point about the US military that has used this kind of technology in its training and its desensitization and whatnot, and they've made a fortune off that as well. Taking a little bit of a turn now, we've talked about how addictive video games are and kind of just the basic principles behind it. Is there an agenda that they're trying to put? You know, the other night we looked at that and how Hollywood is doing that in subtle ways, but is the video game industry doing that? A video game is very sneaky. When it comes to persuasion, says B.J. Fogg, a Stanford University psychologist and behavioral scientist who studies how to persuade people digitally. Our minds have a difficult time distinguishing between reality and simulation, especially when you suspend disbelief and your mind is absorbed in making sense of the game. Further on in the article, Nico Meli, a web and video game designer, states, "Indeed, a new crop of big-budget games is emerging, where the political message is hidden in a game so compelling that the designer can slip anything past our critical faculties. According to this theory," Fogg says, "the more diverting the game, the more distracted the player, the lower the defenses, the more potent the propaganda." Now, they're kind of referring to political stuff here, but as we know, it doesn't take very long if we go look in any, like Best Buy or anything, and we can see very spiritualistic type games that are out there. We looked at the video clip of Spore. It's a game talking about evolution. Let's just kind of slip that stuff in there. And over time, our minds will start to absorb that, and we'll start to believe it. Here's a trailer to a video game. Now, try to pick out, actually it's going to be pretty obvious, but see how spiritual themes are just so permeating within the video game genre.
Megatron has been vanquished. The Allspark destroyed. I had hoped our enemies would leave this world. But revenge is a powerful force. The last great war is upon us.
You know, we can get so distracted in the lights and the fury and the sounds and everything, but was that very, I mean, the spiritual overtones, was that obvious at all, or not really? Because to me it was. Battle lines are drawn. The fallen will strike. The Bible is clear. But it's, before I get to this, what did it say? The fallen will have its revenge. That's actually a character in the video game and in the movie Transformers. His name is the Fallen. But the Bible's clear who the fallen is. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, and I will exalt my throne above the stars, and I will be like the Most High. And it was interesting how it talked about how the great battle is upon us. What battle is upon us that we know of, spiritually speaking? Revelation 20:7-8 says, "And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan will loosen out of his prison and go out to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom as the sand of the sea." So there's a battle that is upon us. It's in the near future. We also associate it, we call it Armageddon, if you will. But it's coming. And battle lines are being drawn and sides are being chosen. And if we can be distracted so long that the decision to make right choices will be delayed and often missed.
Robotic human surrogates combine the durability of a machine with the grace and beauty of the human body. With most people living their lives through their surrogate selves, our world has become a safer place. Take a seat in your STEM chair, and just with the power of your mind, you can control your surrogate and send it out into the real world. You can live your life without limitations. You see what they see. Feel what they feel. and become anyone you want to be from the comfort and safety of your own home. You can finally live the life you've always dreamt of without any risk or danger to yourself.
Heavy Rain is a psychological thriller, and I would say an evolving psychological thriller, in which you can play 4 different characters in turn. And Heavy Rain is a very special game that offers at the same time exploration, dialogue, action, all of which are intertwined within a very powerful story, I think, that players will be able to change out of their actions. Actually, it's really one of the particular aspects of this game is that you control the actions of the player, and those actions have consequences on the story. Some consequences have make small changes on the environment, on the characters, on the scene. Some changes may have dramatic consequences on the story.
With this concept that they can kind of put stuff in there and it will start to change your behavior. We looked at that trailer, The Surrogate. Now, the premise was that you could choose or be anybody you want. Now, in the movies, the difference between movies and video games, as a viewer, you're kind of just passively engaged. In your mind, you can kind of pretend that you're there. What's the difference between the two? With video games, you actually can control your environment. You now make the choices to do right or wrong. That video game that we showed right afterwards, was there anything wholesome about that? I mean, it was advertising you can be a maniac, you can be someone that steals, you can be whatever, all these things, and they were not really wholesome things. Revelation 14:12, here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. Now, when we saw that clip of the video game trailer, did any of those seem to keep the law of God? Or have any showings of faith in Jesus? No. This next clip, we're starting to see where games are going in the future. And we're actually already there. Keeping all these things in mind, how far will it go? Lines are starting to be blurred between what's real and not real and reality. And we're starting to see things that we have not experienced. It's interesting because the film and TV have kind of evolved over the last 100, 120 years, or maybe a little bit less than that. Video games have only been around for about 30 years. And the technology has advanced so much. Here's a clip that incorporates this concept of video games.
Cable? It's me. It's Simon. I'm playing you.
Turn me around.
3, 2, 1.
They call it a game.
Slayers gives the gamer full control of a human being in full-scale combat.
But the players are real.
Every one of our slayers is a death row inmate. Stay alive for 30 sessions, you get set free. That's not a bad deal. I think if you do it, you're mine, boy.
It ain't just a game. We're all slaves.
Gamer. This is not something you can control.
Now, who's endorsing that right there at the bottom? Anybody see that? Xbox. Now, is this technology possible?
So, you've come back for more, Ian.
Yep, let's do it.
This should be good. Let's begin.
Almost got it, almost got it.
Play movie.
Now, whichever games console you prefer to play on, you're still reliant on these, aren't you? Well, Ricky's been to check out a new gaming gadget that lets you play hands-free. So how do you control the game? Well, apparently it's all in the mind.
Over the last couple of years, the way we play video games has changed massively. But now gaming experts have come up with a new piece of kit that lets you control the video game with your mind instead of your hands.
It's a headset. You put it on your head, and what it does is it monitors your brain waves, and it uses those brain waves to be able to control games.
Now, I've actually got the headset on, and it makes me look a little bit geeky, but it is quite cool. It's got 3 sensors on it, 2 just behind my ears, and 1 in the centre of my forehead. And they can tell the computer exactly what I'm thinking. They can tell whether or not I'm paying enough attention, and whether or not I'm relaxed. All you need to do is select the option pull, and now I need to start thinking. I need to start thinking to pull it towards me, pull the barrel towards me. Come on, here it comes. There it goes. It's pretty fast. And there you go. So just with this headset, I'm able to pull things towards me. Pretty impressive.
Now, at these stages, it's a little primitive. But if we've evolved from Pong to the Nintendo Wii in 30 years or less, the sky's the limit of what they're going to do. The fact that we can control now environments, and we can, from a distance, we don't have to go out and actually kill somebody. We can control it digitally to do that, is very, very scary to me. And it's just not right. And what is that doing to our mental ability? We're getting to the point where we're so desensitized to our environments and to things that God never intended, and we just pass it off like it's no big deal. And we have the video game industry to thank for that. Well, in closing, Ephesians 5:14 through 16. Wherefore he saith, Awake, you that sleep, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. The days are evil. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that evil pervades this earth. Sometimes, again, we say killing and robbing is evil, but even something as small as being mad at somebody. I live in Montana, where there's more cows than people. So there's no such thing as really road rage. But is there road rage here in California? Due to population? I think so. Now, what if we didn't have this form of media pervading us everywhere we go? I think we might be a little bit nicer to people. Let's think about these things. Parents, even older generation people, let's put aside these things that distract us, take away from our time, when we can be doing other things more constructively, where we can let our minds grow the way they are supposed to grow and not be stunted, if you will. Let's do stuff more constructive. Let's help God usher in Christ's second coming. With that, I ask that you bow your heads with me in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here with these lovely people. Lord, you have created us, and you have desired us to be more like you. Father, there's many things out there in the world that are not in accordance to you. Many people think that they are no big deal or it's no concern. But Father, you desire us to one day live with you in heaven. And we know that there's not going to be any of this. So help us. Give us the strength to put this stuff away, to be productive with our time, because you've given us a time that is short. Help us to awake out of this slumber, this lethargy that pervades our society, and to stand up and be strong men and women who will make right choices. Help us parents to teach and educate our children, our young ones, the things that are right. Go with us now as we go our separate ways. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.